As a woodworker, DIYer, or a maker, what do you think is your biggest health risk? I bet most of you are thinking it's the big scary machines with sharp spinning blades. But what if I told you if it's something else entirely? This is Kyle, and he is going to help us demonstrate 3 hidden dangers of DIY that you need to know about and ways to keep yourself safe. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance you are a proud maker of sawdust. Did you wear a mask for every cut? Be honest with yourself. I know I certainly have not. Sometimes it's easier to show than tell. So I'm going to take a few cuts with a circular saw and look at all that sawdust that's on the floor. The real danger is not the sawdust, it's actually something in the air that you can't see. Kyle is here to help us measure what's in the air. Using a syringe attached to Kyle's plexiglass lungs, I'm going to bring him to life by making him breathe. Inside his lungs is a sensor, and if you watch the top right part of the screen, you can see the counter slowly climb as high as 40s and 50s. Fine sawdust can be categorized as PM10 and PM2.5. The second one, PM2.5, is so light and microscopic that it can linger in the air for hours, increasing your likelihood of getting it into your lungs. But just how much fine particulates are you breathing? Well, according to a study that I'll link down below, using the lowest estimate, it's about this much per year. This begs the question, is there an acceptable level of exposure, and are there tools that are better or worse for you? I'm going to repeat the same test with a table saw and a sander so we can kind of compare. As far as the levels of exposure, the Environmental Protection Agency recommendation for PM10 is less than 35 micrograms per cubic meter, and for PM2.5 is less than 10. Most people would assume bigger the tool, more sawdust it produces, and the worse off you are. But that's not entirely accurate because, as I pointed out earlier, it's the tools that create the most fine dust that are most dangerous. Take a look at the results of this sander as the particulate count reaches into the 200s when compared to a table saw into the 20s. Now, this doesn't quite paint the entire picture though, because what if your machines are hooked up to dust collection? While not all sanders are designed with dust extraction in mind, it is abundantly clear to me that this Festool sander doesn't allow much of anything to escape into the air. The table saw, on the other hand, while still better than without dust collection, is not a huge improvement for the fine particulates. The finer PM2.5 particulates are considered to be the most harmful because they're extremely small and can penetrate the deepest crevices of your lungs and cause lifelong issues like bronchitis, chronic pulmonary diseases, asthma attacks, or even cancer. Unfortunately, yes, sawdust exposure is known to cause not lung cancer as you would assume, but nasal cancer, and we can all agree that cancers suck. While the best ways to reduce sawdust exposure is to capture it at the source with a dust collector or an extractor, because these fine particulates can spend hours lingering in the air, it's really not a matter of how good your dust collection is with this expensive Festool sander as an example, rather the weakest link in your shop, like the circular saw that I showed, or perhaps your miter saw. Now, there is a solution to all of this. Instead of relying on the idiosyncrasies of your tools or dust collection or a combination, why not just filter the air that's going into your lungs? Careful though, because not all masks are created equal, and you might think it has to do with the quality of the filters, but that's not actually true at all. Because most filters are actually pretty decent when it comes to masks, it has more to do with the quality of the seal and how well it fits the contours of your face. For this reason, I really like this MSA SafetyWorks half-face respirator because they come in various sizes and have soft silicone parameters that flexes to hug my face. Because it has a strap at the bottom and at the top, it gives you a lot of ways to adjust the fit and comfort. And even with my beard, if I pull it a little tight, I can get a pretty good seal. 3M also makes similar masks, and I think both are pretty great options for you to consider. A good way to quickly check the seal on your mask is to cover the vent and breathe some air out. Air should have a hard time escaping and the masks should puff up a little bit. Choosing the right filters for these masks can be overwhelming because there are a ton of options out there. For sawdust and particulates, you want filters that say P100 on it. These filters are 99.97% effective against particulates like PM2.5 and PM10, but unfortunately they do nothing to protect you against chemicals that I'll discuss later in the video. I tested Kyle with this respirator on, and in all of the scenarios that we talked about, here is a worst case scenario of a sander without dust collection. And for good measure, I'm just gonna throw a bunch of fine sawdust at him. And the sensor barely registers anything above baseline with his lungs cleaner than EPA recommended standards. So if you have a friend who is not wearing a mask and is sneezing in their workshop, let them borrow yours. Maybe you can relate to this. In front of me, I have a coaster, a rattle can of lacquer, and not a whole lot of time. Would you go over the arm, cover with your shirt, or hold your breath? And what if you were applying hard wax oils? Would you care less then? Nearly all wood finishes need something to help them dry. Unfortunately, these additives often contain something known as volatile organic compounds that can be very bad for your health. If you look at the can, it'll often say just how much VOCs are added into the solution. This can of lacquer, for example, has 680 grams per liter, while this can of Minwax stain has less than 550 grams per liter. And this can of Rubio Monocoat says it has 0% VOCs. More on that later, but the point is, if your grandpa had access to the finish as a child, there's a good chance it has a lot of VOCs. And while not all VOCs are known to be toxic, traditionally many of these finishes contain some of the nastiest agents that can cause short-term effects like headaches, nausea, dizziness, and if you keep exposing yourself to them in the long term, they can cause organ damage, nervous system damage, or even cancer. I just finished spraying the coaster with lacquer, and I'm gonna have Kyle take just one breath of air. Watch as this sensor goes from 0.2 milligrams per cubic meter to maxing it out within seconds. Ideally, you're not breathing any volatile organic compounds, but that's not really realistic. In fact, most of my testings had a small amount of VOC contamination despite my best effort to try to control for it. For context, less than 0.5 milligrams per cubic meter is acceptable. Greater than 1 milligrams per cubic meter, especially greater than 3, is considered to be pretty harmful. If you're familiar with lacquer, the testing results wouldn't surprise you because many finishes, including lacquer, smell horrible. The bad smell is your brain telling you something isn't quite right. But what about hard wax oils? Some of them smell really nice, like this bumbleshoot that could be used as a citrus orange candle from Home Goods. I'm gonna apply some of this finish on a small piece of wood and let Kyle's lungs tell us how it stacks up. By the way, if you want to know more about hard wax oil finish comparisons on different types of wood along with VOC testings that I've done, you should check out my good friend John's video linked in the description below. In this demonstration, you can see bumbleshoot shoot, pun intended, the VOC beyond the maximum capacity of the sensor within minutes. Now, let's try that again with Rubio Monocoat that once again advertises 0% VOCs on the can, but the sensor reads well above 3 milligrams per cubic meter in the same testing setup. I don't know the exact criteria they used to derive the 0% VOCs on the finish and the accelerator, but looking through their material safety data sheet, the accelerator has a whole bunch of hazard disclosures for acute inhalation toxicity, and they recommend applying it outdoors or in a well-ventilated area. How often have you done that with Rubio Monocoat? Another trend that has become very popular in the last decade or so is epoxy river tables. Whether you love them or hate them, I could not tell you the last time I saw someone wear a respirator when mixing or applying epoxy. For whatever reason, people think it is harmless, and I think our buddy Kyle is pretty beat at this point, so I'm gonna give him a break from all of this toxicity and instead mix a small cup of epoxy, put it next to the sensor, and cover it with a box. Now, if you're a veteran epoxy pourer, you know that epoxy shrinks after it cures. A good chunk of that shrinkage escapes into the atmosphere in the form of volatile organic compounds. And you can see here the sensor is maxing out before the epoxy even begins to warm up for the curing process. Interestingly, just like hard wax oils, there are brands out there that are touting their epoxy products as VOC free, and perhaps they're right, but I'm going to keep a safe distance. The best way to protect yourself from VOCs is to live in a bubble and never come out. The second best way is to wear a mask with an appropriately rated cartridge. This is a multi-purpose cartridge that will protect you against particulates, kind of the same as the P100 filter we spoke about earlier in the sawdust segment, but it'll also protect you against volatile organic compounds and a whole bunch of other stuff. As you can see, Kyle is taking an onslaught of lacquer spray, and in our initial test, just one breath maxed out the sensor within seconds. In this case, the reading did increase from a baseline of 0.3 to max out around 0.9. The reason for this increase could have been due to poor seal in the box, respirator, or the cartridge being super old. Honestly, I didn't buy a new one, so sorry. But the results are remarkably better than without a respirator. I don't personally love the size and weight of these filters, but for that reason, I use the slimmer P100 filters when I'm woodworking, and that's what I'm doing most of the time, and these are the filters I use when I'm applying finishes. While the epoxy trend is dying a slow and painful death, trendy new products are popping up everywhere. It seems like I cannot go a single day without seeing an influencer promoting the newest laser or 3D printer. Let me be clear. These are wonderful new technologies that allow your spouse to buy Live, Love, Laugh signs from Marshall's for 10 bucks. As the maker though, using these tools, you might be surprised to find out that the sign has one less word in it. And I have to admit, this one took me by surprise. You know, before the 70s, we used to put lead in our paint and gasoline, and that were eventually banned, right? But even to this day, gas station pumps will say unleaded as to remind ourselves of the old relic. Similarly, if you're at the home center, you might notice some plywood or MDF say formaldehyde free. Formaldehyde is an extremely potent cancer-causing chemical, and it is tightly regulated in composite wood materials. But it turns out natural wood is never truly formaldehyde-free. Think of formaldehyde in wood like water in an ice rink. It is impossible for you to go for a swim in it unless the temperature picks up. In the same way, it is unlikely for you to be exposed to formaldehyde from raw wood unless you're blasting it with heat like that of a laser. It is important to keep in mind, formaldehyde is not only dangerous byproduct of using a laser, and the byproducts really depend on the type of material that you're burning or etching. As you can see, in the process of engraving just my little logo, Kyle's lungs went from 0.019 milligrams per cubic meter to nearly 10 times that, and it would be considered pretty unhealthy level of formaldehyde. What is surprising though is just how much fine particulates this laser produced that it maxed out the sensor. After running the shop for 20 minutes using my HEPA filtration system, it was still reading higher than just about anything else we've tested in this video so far. Even the next day, it was dancing around the EPA's safety standards. And this goes to show just how long fine particulates can linger in the air and just how bad lasers are in producing fine particulates. Unlike this laser, many of them come with a proper exhaust port and you can hook it up to a smoke filter. While the smoke filter will manage the fine particulates, if it does not have an activated charcoal layer, dangerous chemicals like formaldehyde will pass right through it and into your lungs. When it comes to 3D printers, I don't have a lot to say because one, I don't own one, and two, the research is still kind of ongoing, to be honest, but I did find a paper that I'll link in the description below that measured different combinations of 3D printers and filaments and discovered they emit 216 types of volatile organic compounds, with 30 of them known to be irritants or carcinogens. It does not matter if it's sawdust, wood finishes, epoxy, lasers, or 3D printers. As a maker, you are taking brunt of the health risk because you are the ones producing the fine particulates, the VOCs, the formaldehydes, and other nasty chemicals in your shop, even though the finished product might be completely safe for your customers. Because of this, you should take the necessary steps to protect yourself, since you only get one life to live, and Kyle, unfortunately, wasted his in the process of this test. Thank you for watching. I will see you guys on the next one.